We really are in a fantastically exciting phase of our business right now, where for 12 years, we've been grinding, trying to find our home, trying to find our space in the industry. And now things are coming together. It feels like a 12-year overnight success in some sense.
Hey, this is Jesse here, and you're about to hear my discussion with the one and only Pierre Lindh, co-founder and managing director of NEXT.io, which is the world's iGaming community. Returning for his third appearance on the podcast, Pierre talks about the growth trajectory that Next is now on, his review of last week's ICE conference in Barcelona, his thoughts on the future of premium content, how to build vibrant communities, and we break down the recent launch of the Starties award show, which will be held at the Next New York City Summit in March. Pierre's one of my absolute favorite people in the industry, and it was a treat to welcome him back to the podcast for a discussion that I know you're going to enjoy. By the way, if you don't yet have your ticket for the Next New York City Summit, there's a very limited supply and the show does sell out every year. Look in the show notes below for a link to get your ticket, along with a discount code for $200 off your full event pass, and we'll see you there in a few short weeks. The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 4 out of the top 5 US operators personalize player experiences with Optimove. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/bettingstartups. If you like what you see, you'll get your first month free. All right, we are back with episode 150 of the Betting Startups podcast. It's not exactly a milestone number, but still a number worth acknowledging. So I have a celebratory coffee going here for this conversation with today's guest, who's making an unprecedented third appearance on the pod and is quickly becoming one of my favorite annual traditions having him on. We have none other than the co-founder and managing director of Next.io, the man himself, Mr. Pierre Lindh. Welcome back to the Betting Startups podcast, my friend.
It's great to be here, Jesse. And me, myself, I'm drinking my vitamin C water here after contracting the classic ice flu of the last week. It's a conference, but very happy to be here with you, my friend. Very excited to go. Third time. I mean, you're a legend, Jesse. Always happy to be here.
Well, game recognized game, Pierre. It's always good to have you on here. I always enjoy our conversations. So lots of fun stuff I want to talk about with you today. But just to start off on a bit of a more serious note, and much of the audience will probably be aware, but in case they aren't, the real money gaming industry suffered a massive loss a couple of weeks ago with the sudden passing of Mr. Nico Jansen, who was the founder and CEO of Bet at Best, but perhaps even more well known as the co-host of the Next.io weekly news podcast. And Nico was only 43 years old, leaves behind a daughter and countless friends and family members that miss him dearly. And Pierre, it's obviously been an extremely emotional few weeks for the iGaming community as they come to grips with the shocking news. You were very close with Nico, and I can only imagine the roller coaster of emotions you have felt since hearing the news. So just want to check in with you and ask how you're doing, and maybe have you share a few words about Nico for the audience here who may not have had the privilege of knowing him as well as you and many others did.
Yeah, to echo what you said here first and foremost, Jesse, Nico Jansen was beloved by so many people of the industry. It really is absolutely amazing, the stories that have come to light after his passing, of all the incredible things that he would do with the many people that he connected with in the industry. It's such a strange message to receive in the moment. It's like really hard to grasp, I think, both for me and for most people, that he passed so suddenly. He had a cardiac event, essentially, that came out of the blue. No sign at all. And in fact, he recorded the podcast with our colleague Connor just a few hours before it happened. And Nico was talking about how excited he was to go to ICE and how he had booked the trip the same day. And then a few hours later, the cardiac arrest took place, and very suddenly, Nico departed from this earth. It's an incredible tragedy. It's really hard to explain it in any other way. It's really hard to find the silver lining in all of this. But I will say, though, that the memorial that was held during ICE last week was an incredible way for the people that Nico got to know throughout the years to get together and to connect with each other. Nico really amassed an incredible group of people in that respect. And it was, of course, very emotional. The funeral in Munich yesterday, same thing. The amount of people that came to say their farewell to Nico was really a testament to the great person that he was. And we concluded at the end, some of the close friends of Nico, that in all the tragedy, the bonds that have been created between the people that Nico brought together is there for life. And again, if there is such a thing as a silver lining, I think it is that. Yesterday I met a very old friend of mine, Hjalmar Letin, who I haven't seen in 10 years, who apparently was Nico's friend without me knowing it. And so we reconnected yesterday. There was another German old friend of mine that I also met about 10 years ago, who I used to host when I was a poker VIP manager back in the day, who turned up, and we also reconnected, So Nico still keeps this incredible power to connect people after his passing. So of course, very, very sad, and we miss him greatly.
Yeah, my heart goes out to you and everybody that was close with him. I never had the good fortune to meet him, but it's really interesting, Pierre. I listen to the NEXT.io weekly news podcast every Friday, and I feel like I know him through that, right? And one of the common threads I observed through the WhatsApp group where people were sharing their stories about him and their memories, the one commonality I observed was just the spirit that he brought and how that touched people. And that was really the common thread. And, I feel like I could sense that he was that type of person. Really genuine, I think is kind of the key takeaway.
He had no agenda. That was the thing with Nico. He just loved people, and he just loved making people happy. He really was a unique, special person in that regard. And, as I said, so many stories came to light after this that, Nico used to send Christmas cards to people that he met at the conferences. Every year he would send Christmas cards and he would hand sign them. And he'd always have some internal joke with all the people that he met. In our case, we were the dynamic duo. That was me and Nico's thing, that we're the dynamic duo. And after every recording, we joked that, let's go to the beach and have a pina colada, even if it was in January. And, he would have this internal joke. He would level with every single person that he would meet. And just, to pull up another story of Nico that really tells you the type of person that he is. I was speaking to his best friend yesterday, and his best friend has a son, a 3-year-old son. Nico would, once in a while, unannounced, knock on the door. He would bring a bottle of champagne, and he would hang out in the apartment of the best friend every so often. And every time, it knocked on the door, the 3-year-old would be like, "Oh, it's Nico is coming," and get so excited. Really heartbreaking. And he told me yesterday that, the other day we got a knock on the door unexpectedly, and the son was like, "Oh my God, it's Nico is coming." And, he didn't have the heart to tell him about this. But I think if there's something that you wish in life, is to have that reaction on people,
Yeah, well, like you said, it's really hard to find a silver lining through all this, and particularly, for somebody so young. I'm also 43, so I really just puts things in perspective. But maybe if there's one tiny silver lining and just taking together all of these amazing stories and anecdotes and memories that people have shared about Nico, it's a reminder to all of us to sort of channel our inner Nico and be Nico, right? And, we're all busy with our 100%. Days. Life's crazy. Business is crazy. Channeling his spirit, I think, is the ultimate tribute, perhaps. So
something that a lot of people said now recently is that, Nico would always lift everyone up from nowhere. And a lot of people were saying, I wish I had done the same thing to him, reciprocate the nice thoughts. And I was thinking about that too. Like, I wish I told Nico more often what I thought of him, But I think the second line of thinking there is, well, there are other people in my life that I am not reaching out to enough. And so maybe this is a reminder and a wake-up call to be more present with the people in my life. And I think the same goes for a lot of us. This is a wake-up call for sure.
100%. Well, we'll hold him close and his memory close, and we'll channel our inner Nico here as we all march forward. Let's shift a little bit here, Pierre, and get into a retrospective on ice. As you just said at the outset here, you're popping the vitamin C's right now to combat the ice flu that I know often goes around. But I was, I think, one of 5 people in the industry that wasn't able to make it to Barcelona last week. There was 50,000 people that made it. I was scrolling LinkedIn with FOMO, and certainly since ice concluded late last week, the reviews have all been flooding in, and it seemed like an overwhelmingly positive event. There was obviously a lot of uncertainty with the move from London to Barcelona. Anytime an event at the scale of ice relocates to a new venue in a new city, lots of uncertainty, lots of questions, and certainly, from the outside looking in, by all accounts, it smashed it. I would love to hear the first review officially of the ICE conference from anybody I've talked to personally about it. What was your take on it, and what did you see that sort of made you think that Barcelona was the right place for it? And then I guess maybe a second part, Pierre, is like for you being in the events business, what potentially impressed you from what you saw from the Clarion team executing this event in a new location?
No, there's a lot of really interesting insights to this, I think. And one of them is the fact that, we have a couple of shows now in Europe that are all trying to establish themselves as the biggest show in the world, or the mother of all conferences, or the taglines vary between some of the other ones. But ICE doesn't need a tagline. ICE itself is the tagline. So if you show up at ICE, you immediately know that this is the one. There is no competition of the first place. Let's just start by establishing that. I think that was the first impression that was shared by everyone, like just the sheer size of this event. Now, that's a blessing and a curse for sure, because the event is so big that it's very difficult to move around and to meet all the potential partners and the people that you want to meet during these 3 days. It's also very difficult if you have a meeting in one end of the room to the next. It takes a good 20 minutes to move from one side to the other, maybe even more if you bump into people to say hi to on the way. So for me, for example, we had a small media booth on the sports betting side of the conference. And it was only on the third day I managed to make my way into the iGaming part of the conference and actually be more close with our close partners and stuff like that. So I think it would probably be an idea to add a fourth day if we still can muster up energy to go back to a conference on the fourth day. Another thing that I took notice of is I was there until 6:30 p.m. every single day, and I still had energy. It was the weirdest thing, Jesse, because I usually get exhausted by 4 p.m. at ICE. And I think it has to do with the acoustics, that usually at shows, it can be really noisy, and that is really fatiguing, especially trying to hear through that noise and just being bombarded with this noise constantly. I didn't get that feeling in Barcelona, and that was just such a comforting thing. And this, detail, as it were, makes a massive difference, because those 2.5 hours extra for 3 days makes a really big difference on the amount of connections you can strike. So those were a couple of points. And then, as I mentioned, yes, I'm sick today, and we produced a poll in our community asking people, like, how many people got flu after ICE, and like 50% of everyone got sick after the show. And I think it has something to do with the fact that it's hosted in January, which is peak flu season. So very difficult to avoid the fact that when you cram 50,000 people into the same space, that bacteria is going to travel and viruses are going to travel through space. And if you think about it, what a bigger company sends 100 people to their stands, right? And if half of them is taken out for, 3, 4, 5 days after the show, that's a huge business expense to the company. And I mean, if 50,000 people attend ICE and half of them get sick, again, that is something that has a massive negative impact on the industry itself, And I really think the organizers should take that seriously for the future, how to mitigate the spread of viruses during the show. It was a bit of a wake-up call during the pandemic for a lot of us as organizers on how do we contain COVID. And during that time, it was a lot less viruses spreading during the shows. We were really good at distributing hand sanitizers. People were wearing masks. People were a little bit more mindful of social distancing, filter systems and other measures that we could incorporate, testing on site, stuff like that, to minimize the spread of illness and sickness. Because I really do think it is on a lot of people's minds before you go to a show like I say, I hope I don't get sick this time. And really and truly, I mean, I'm lucky to be a healthy individual, but not everyone is. And so it can be a risk to go to ICE, a health risk. That's not good. So I think that's something the organizers need to pay attention to for the future.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make. I mean, even the shift in the calendar from February to January, that 1 month even seems to make a bit of a difference here. You're right. We're right in the heart of flu season. And the point you make is a good one, which I really haven't heard talked about, frankly, which is like the cost of that on the back end of these shows, right? Personally speaking, if you get sick, that sucks. We all hate being sick. Nobody likes it. But from a business perspective, that productivity loss for the entire week thereafter, I mean, that needs to be factored into the total cost and the total investment of sending people to events like this. So I don't know what the answer is. I mean, you mentioned a couple things there, maybe, more hand sanitizer, better filtration, et cetera. I don't know if there's really anything you can do to defend against it ultimately, but I guess it's just a reality of events like this. And comes with the territory, I guess. Not much you can really do about it
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
Just a simple thing as hand sanitizers goes a very, very, very long way. But there are more things you can do also. I just think that for the moment being, the organizers aren't doing anything. And during COVID, we were, Yeah. And I just think that we shouldn't forget that part, because it really does make a difference.
Awesome. So ICE sounded like a resounding success. I will be there next year, but really happy for everybody that had a really successful show. And congrats to Clarion for executing the event and the move. I'm sure it wasn't a trivial thing to manage for them. So hats off to the team there at Clarion. Let's shift again, Pierre. I want to talk about Next. You were here a year ago. At that time, you and I were chatting a little bit about some of the initiatives you and the team had planned for 2024. Since then, you and I have caught up in a few conversations more recently, and you've shared with me that things are really feeling like they're starting to click. Can you just give us like a 10,000 foot or 10,000 meter sort of view of how things are going with Next? Talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that you set out to invest in for 2024 and just kind of the overall trajectory of the business right now, just sort of overall sentiment in terms of how you're feeling with that trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely, Jesse. I mean, we really are in a fantastically exciting our business right now, where for 12 years, we've been grinding, trying to find our home, trying to find our space in the industry. And now things are coming together. It feels like a 12-year overnight success in some sense, where things are starting to take off for the business now. I think it's just the accumulation of doing the right thing for a long time through our projects. So we see an uptick in everything we do at the same time right now. New York is falling into place, our summit there. Valletta is really taking off. Our media is growing exponentially, where in 2024, we grew page views by like 250%. And we are continuing to grow into 2025 on that front. We have more and more serious partners that are recognizing us for what we are, because we are a little bit different than the others. We are not just a standard trade show like everyone else, that is a copy-paste where you exhibit and you go to stands and meet leads. We are much more kind of like the Davos of the iGaming industry, if you will, where we focus a lot more on high-level connection building, thought leadership, and having fun doing it. And I think now people are starting to learn and recognize and understanding how to get most value out of what we do. Things are really falling into place. We've been consistent for a very long time. I think consistency is like the lead word that we have behind us in our success in the company, where we've just consistently tried to deliver to our partners and to our delegates and to our readers. So if we ever make a mistake, and that's always going to happen, we always say that mistakes will happen, but what matters is how you deal with them. So whenever we make a mistake to a partner, for example, we see it as an opportunity to show them how committed we are to them by overcompensating, by doing the best we can to deliver more value than what they were expecting. And all of those years of accumulating those wins kind of lead up to this inflection point that we're at now, where the business is just really taking off, So it's really exciting times ahead for sure.
I want to double click on a couple things from 2024 with Next. The first is the premium content. So again, actually just the other day, re-listened to our discussion on my podcast last year ahead of today's conversation, just to remind myself what we talked about. One of the things you were excited about a year ago was the launch of a premium content offering through Next.io. And you launched it earlier last year. Really, really great content you and the team were producing. But at some point throughout the year, you recognized that maybe the commercial model wasn't viable. Maybe it wasn't getting the traction that you had sort of hoped or anticipated. And ultimately, since then, you've abandoned the paywall, I guess, with the content. Can you just talk through kind of that journey, that experience, and maybe some of the learnings and takeaways that you took from sort of that experiment and when you realized maybe it wasn't the right call and sort of the decision around reversing, that approach?
Yeah, it's really funny what can happen in a business sometimes, Jesse, because this was part of like our original kind of master plan at Next.io, and how we raised capital was kind of like the long-term play was that we were going to be a premium media distributor. So eventually people were going to need to subscribe to enjoy our content. And that was our big play. Like the subscription is the holy grail, we used to say, when we're pitching to investors and stuff like that. And there's a funny thing that happens sometimes where you get so committed to that vision that it's difficult to kind of reverse course. You get more committed and you really want to make it work, even though you know that it's not the right way to go for the business. And I think in our case, like I realized that okay, it's definitely an opportunity to earn subscription revenues and we can maybe make it work one way or the other. But actually, the product is working against our bigger kind of ethos in Next, or our bigger mission, which is to, be kind of the most influential organization of the industry, to be the world's iGaming community, kind of be the organization that ties the industry together. Because every time we produce a content piece that is behind a paywall, it's limited to a very few amount of people, rather than the entire industry and beyond. Right. So first and foremost, we really damaged the traffic to our website by putting all the best content that we had behind a paywall. But then also, it was difficult to get that brand recognition out there, because part of everything that we do with our conferences and content is about just being relevant and out there to as many people as we possibly can. It was a difficult decision to reverse course and to say to the shareholders, you know what, this is not the strategy we should be leading into the future with Next. This is not who we are. Naturally, the shareholders at first gave a lot of resistance. The changing strategy is never easy for a company with shareholders that have bought into a certain vision. But I said, just trust us, look at kind of like where the trends are heading with our content, look at where we are now, and believe what we are doing, and they gave us a chance, and quickly we saw the fruit of our labor there, where once we unleashed the content again, our news portal became very, very popular, very, very quick. As I mentioned before, it's still growing exponentially to this day, and that means that our traditional media revenues are growing with it. Yes, so we doubled our revenues last year from 2023, and we are looking to double those revenues again this year. So revenue generation is much faster than what we have budgeted for on the subscription side. So now the shareholders are bought in with the new vision. They are happy. We are heading in the right direction. We are producing numbers. And at the end of the day, that's what matters.
I'm curious to just quickly stick with the theme of premium content, Pierre. Sounds like the ethos of what Next is building and the community it's nurturing and facilitating, that premium content subscription wasn't aligned to that ethos. So it makes sense strategically why you would shift that paywall away. But from a purely commercial perspective, do you think that meaningful businesses can be built here in 2025 by charging access to premium content? I mean, there's, especially now over the last year, I feel like there's a lot of excellent independent writers and creators that have Substacks or newsletters, and some of them have paywalls. And I know, talking to some of them, it's a grind for them to, to get people to pay for their content. Just from a purely commercial perspective, like what's your viewpoint on the viability of charging access to premium content? Can you build a meaningful business there? Is it, something you can maybe self-sustain but not really scale? Like, what's just sort of your philosophy there based on your experience with the last year?
No, it has certainly been done. And that was our kind of inspiration as well, the fact that EGR is still behind the paywall with their news. And they became very successful in the late 2010s, and especially during the pandemic, where a lot of the industry came on board as subscribers to EGR. But it very much feels to me like that model is dead. It very much feels to me like news to a certain extent is commoditized. And what we do is we go kind of a little bit step further in hiring an expert journalistic team that is operating with very clear guidelines, and they are proper, real journalists doing incredible work for the industry. Now, don't think that is enough to justify a paywall with that particular product, because it's difficult for the sales team to convince a business why they should in a product like that doesn't necessarily impact your budgets in any way. Like, you wouldn't adjust your revenue target because you subscribe to this product. That makes it a little bit more difficult. So it's kind of like a luxury subscription, if you will. As I mentioned, beyond that, I do think the goal should be to use the incredible kind of opportunity to create this type of content to make a difference for the industry. But you make a very good point also of the fact that you have a lot of independent journalists these days that didn't exist a couple of years ago. And I suppose it's the success of Substack and the Substack model that have kind of brought some of the most talented journalists into their own platforms. As you point out, it's a big grind. And if I were to guess what's going to happen in the future, I think we'll see like more consolidation there, because it's difficult for these individual journalists to produce content and sell at the same time. Whereas there are other organizations that can probably do the commercial part for them. So that would be my guess in general, that we'll start probably to see some consolidation on that side. But you're right to point out, like some of the newsletters that I follow, Dustin Goke or Steven Rudd, for those guys, like it's incredible newsletters that they produce. I'm a massive fan of them for sure.
You touched upon the fact that Next has officially, I don't say repositioned itself, but has adopted a bit of an expanded identity to become the world's iGaming community. And I thought that was super interesting. It was maybe a few months ago, you popped a message into the WhatsApp group, which I don't know how many people are in there now, 600, 800, maybe 1,000, and said, hey, we have this community. You people are the community. This is happening. Let's go ahead and acknowledge it now and formalize this to some extent. And I find it very interesting what you and Martin and your team have built over the last 12 years, because really, for all the great things you and the team do, like really what you've built is community. You've built it organically. Your Valletta events, I think, really solidified that on the European side, and more recent years in New York, really building community here on the North American side. And you're leaning heavily into that. And I'd love to spend a few minutes talking about that, Pierre. The word community gets thrown around all the time. Lots of guests on my podcast talk about the communities they're serving with the different products and apps that they're building. And I feel like this word community gets thrown around a lot, but there's maybe not always like a clear alignment of understanding or definition around what community means. So maybe as a first part of this conversation, I'd love to just kind of get your perspective on what community means to you. Like, what is community, and how do you think about even starting to build a community? Just give us a little bit of anecdote based on your 12 years nurturing what is now a very vibrant and thriving Next.io community.
Yeah, here's an intuitive thing to say, but no one does it in practice in this industry. So iGaming people don't only want to talk about iGaming. They don't only want to kind of provide professional advice to each other. People within the industry also want a sense of belonging within the industry, because I think as time goes on that our work and life balance more and more blends together. So why not try to create communities where people can come together that have a shared interest in iGaming, but they also here to make connections with each other, like genuine connections, friendships, And let me reverse the tape a little bit, because I come from esports world back in 2003, 2002, where we mostly played Counter-Strike. I was the moderator of the biggest Swedish community at the time, called Fragbite. Still one of my better friends, he's the CEO there today, Daniel Perrault, shout out to him. And after that, when I kind of pivoted from esports into poker, I ran the biggest poker community in Sweden called Pro Sharks, and we built that community together. And the learnings from that time, I would say from the esports side of things, is that what united us was our interest in Counter-Strike. What we talked about in those communities were very little about Counter-Strike, actually. It was mostly about, what kids do in their day-to-day life and how to figure out the world and whatever when you're like 15 years of age, I created some connections from that time that are still some of my best friends today. I have 3 tattoos, and one of them is from that particular community at that time that we all shared, as a memory of the communities that we created at that time. And I think that is what I bring with me into Next.io and the community that we aspire to build here, which is essentially, as I just mentioned, bring the industry together, give people a sense of belonging. Now we are adults, right? And it can be quite difficult to find connections as an adult human being. It's easier when you're a kid, And these days to find connections and purpose and have people to talk to and to share thoughts with, And so we want to offer a platform where people can come together, talk about the industry, but talk about other things that unites us as well. It could be anything from how to advance our careers to mental health, or what was the football game like yesterday. And that is the aspiration behind the tagline of becoming the world's iGaming community. It is not about only speaking about iGaming. It is about uniting people together and giving them a sense of belonging.
Yeah, and certainly I get that from observing all of the chatter in that WhatsApp group. There's a tie that binds everybody, to your point, which is iGaming, but the variety of the discussion in there goes well beyond the borders of iGaming. And it really is that uniting force that brings these people together and nurtures and fosters those connections, which is so important. And, there is a business value there, but really it is the human element, I think, that is the special part of really what you've created. So I guess the flip side of it is like you get a lot of people in a community and, sometimes you got to go in there and like set boundaries and guidelines and do's and don'ts, and sometimes come in and moderate some of the discussion or be the bad cop at times. Like, talk about some of like the practical challenges of growing a community, right? It's not all roses. It's not a straight line all of the time, I guess. And I've seen you come into that WhatsApp group at times and have to, swing the hammer. Just talk about, I guess, the challenges that go along with all the good parts of the community.
Yeah, so like every platform has its pros and cons and its way to generate most optimal discussions, let's say. WhatsApp is built as such that it's difficult to have 1,000 people in the same group and to kind of create order. It's very difficult to just let the conversation go. I think WhatsApp is more built for, let's say 10 to 20 people in groups, let's say 10 to 50 maybe. But 1,000 people requires heavy moderation. And that's a real shame. Like I really, 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 really hate it. Because that thwarts what I just talked about, which is to let the conversation go and let people network with each other and get to know each other and share their challenges and talk about what went wrong today and make fun of each other and all of that stuff. There are other platforms that lends themselves to more open conversation. I'll just go back again to my old days. I'm raised on IRC, Internet Relay Chat, with Mirk and QuakeNet, and the communities there are free-flowing, right? Like you can have hundreds of people in a chat and just free-flowing conversation on a day-to-day basis without it becoming overwhelming, like on WhatsApp. So when we think about how we want to build our community of the future, we don't want to create just one community. I think the key is to create many communities and let people gather on their own terms in different mediums and kind of find where they feel most comfortable. Some people might prefer the more kind of moderated chat or WhatsApp. Others might prefer a more free-flowing conversation on Discord. Others might prefer to interact in a forum-style dashboard on the website, for example. There are many different mediums to create communities through, and they all have a different way to allow users to express themselves. So with WhatsApp, I think with time, people understand the culture that you're trying to build as the moderator. It's really important to be consistent in the moderation and to not like pick favorites and to be to be kind of like a shining example for the community. When we started that community, it was full chaos. Like no one knew kind of what the purpose was or how do you act in this group of people and whatnot. But by time, people have learned. And now I don't hardly ever moderate the next community on WhatsApp. Very, very rarely, actually. Because people have learned by time that, like, where are the limits? What are you supposed to do? What are you not supposed to do? And it's worked out with time, actually. So that's why, like, you create, like, an organic community. It's very difficult to put, like, a large amount of people in a community overnight because there isn't really anything that, like, there isn't, like, a history there or, like, a culture there. And I think this is what happened with, if you remember Google Plus back in the day, that launched in around 2010, which was the Facebook killer at the time. They amassed like 1 billion users in the first week or something ridiculous like that. The community was thriving and everyone was saying that this was going to kill Facebook. And then almost overnight, it became a ghost town, Google Plus. It just completely died out. The difference between Facebook and Google Plus, of course, is that Facebook started from 1 university to 2 universities and then to 3. And so there was an organic buildup of that community and that platform that led to a sustainable network effect that lasted over time. Whereas in Google Plus, 1 billion users came into that platform overnight, didn't know how to interact with it, and quickly it fell apart, kind of thing. So that if you want to build communities, you need to build the communities organically. It needs to happen slowly but surely. Let people know who you are, let them kind of create a culture, and then by time, you can expand that community. But important not to do it overnight.
Yeah, that's funny. I actually almost forgot about Google Plus. I remember waking up one morning, logging into my Gmail, and there was, like a pop-up or whatever. It's like, hey, check out Google Plus, and like you click to go in to check it out, and it was a ghost town, right? Like it depopulated it with everybody, all your friends, like profiles in there, but nobody was doing anything. It was a really weird thing.
Do you remember Google Wave?
It's funny when you said Google Plus, I'm like, wait a minute, Google Wave was before that.
Google Wave, that was before. Yeah. That was the email killer, if you remember.
Right.
And they ran up against a similar problem, which was like, they were like, email is from like 1984. It's a dated way to communicate. We need to create something better. So they created Google Wave, and it's so much better than email. But there was no way to interact between Google Wave and email. So either you need to do email or Google Wave. And of course, the entire goddamn world communicates through email. So very hard to convince people to go on Google Wave just for you. So that also fell apart.
All right, let's shift gears because we have you on here at the end of January, as we've had the past 2 years. Number one, it's a great time of year to just generally catch up, but also self-servingly, you do have an event coming up in, I think, 44 days now, not to stress anybody out from the Next.io team, but the New York City Summit is returning to Manhattan in March, and it's all systems go now for you and the team getting ready for that. So to start this conversation, Pierre, can you tell people a little bit about the Next NYC Summit in terms of just what the value proposition is for anybody that's maybe not attended in the past? And for this year specifically, what are some of the initiatives or parts of the agenda that might be a little bit different from previous years?
Yeah, like the easiest way to paint a picture is that we try to say that we are like the Davos of iGaming, or the Davos of online sports betting and the sports betting verticals in general. The meaning of that is that, again, we are not focused on the massive. We are focused on high-level connection building, doing really serious business with each other, people meeting other potential business partners and customers they didn't expect to meet. Whereas like traditional expos, you cannot pre-book most of the meetings, and enjoying really high-level thought leadership from top industry leaders. And so that is the value proposition. And extending that a little bit, this is operators meeting suppliers and investors meeting startups. Those are kind of the 4 segments that we target to Next NYC. It's hosted in Lower Manhattan. It's in a gorgeous venue. Actually, if you look at the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, when Leonardo DiCaprio is on his boat and he's throwing fun coupons to the FBI agents, in the background, you can see our venue, the Convene. So that's a little fun fact for you. So that gives you a little bit context where it is. And I would like to say that it is the most senior and productive and valuable conference of the whole year. It really is next level. We work together with Morgan Stanley. Speakers are second to none. Delegates are incredible. We have tier 1 media there from CNBC, Bloomberg, Business Insider, you name it. It's a very special show for sure.
It is a special show, and it's a refreshing antidote to the very large sort of tentpole events that occur in other parts of the industry. And for startups specifically, I always endorse it as probably the highest ROI show for startups, to the point you made around the influential attendees that are there. I mean, it's 1,200 people. It's not a large number of people. It's not 50,000, which is to say there's a high likelihood you will bump in to people that you might not otherwise get access to. So it's a great surface area for startups and entrepreneurs that are looking to put themselves on the map, get themselves on the radar, some of these influential people. I really am hard pressed to think of a better event for them to attend than Next NYC Summit for that purpose. And really the agenda does provide a lot of value for startups. And I will take this opportunity to plug the Starties. So
yeah, let's go.
This is only 24 hours old, so I don't really have the elevator pitch crystallized yet. But yesterday we announced the launch of the Starties, which is an awards show for the industry by startups for startups. And we thought that there are so many entrepreneurs building cool things in the industry, and there's so much happening at the early stage, yet from the perspective of traditional award shows within the industry, it's almost like a forgotten about segment, right? Some of these award shows have like the rising star category, which tips the hat to startups, but really is just one award category with like 19 other categories next to it. And we wanted to put startups and the founders and entrepreneurs and the builders and disruptors front and center and make this about them. So the Starties is our concept that we're going to try at Next NYC Summit. We announced it yesterday. The Starties came together rather organically. So I think one through line from your story with building Next and certainly my story building betting startups, it's all been very organic, right? We've built our respective companies, businesses, platforms very organically. And the origin story of the Starties is a very organic one as well. And really excited to get the announcement out yesterday. In the 24 hours since we put the PR out, inbox has been blowing up, the DMs have been blowing up. Everybody seems like they're overwhelmingly enthusiastic about the concept. Now it's incumbent upon us to execute and meet that level of expectation we've now set, but that's a challenge we've signed up for and we're up for it. So we're gonna give it everything we've got to make it happen and make this a memorable event that hopefully becomes a semi-annual or an annual one. And we couldn't do it without the support and partnership of you and your team, Pierre, at Next. So, shout out to Maria and Anusha and Rory and yourself and everybody else behind the scenes helping to make this a reality. I will also give a quick shout out and word of gratitude here to some sponsors that have very graciously bought into this vision, bought into the concept, and want to be aligned with it. So presenting sponsor for the Starties is eBerg Capital. Roger, Andrew, Ethan, they're very well known, obviously, within the industry. They are huge supporters of the real money gaming space. Obviously, they're on the cap table of a lot of the most promising startups and growth stage companies in the space. So, they're very well known, but we're very appreciative to them for their belief in the vision and the concept. So they are the presenting sponsor for it, alongside 3 gold sponsors who have equally bought into the vision. We have our friends at Defy the Odds. So quick hello to Kelly, Sue, and Paris, who are doing wonderful things to support underrepresented founders that are trying to enter the space. They're providing a lot of support and value to those folks, and really excited to have them affiliated with the event. And alongside Defy the Odds, we have Optimove, who just launched actually last week at ICE, a brand new initiative called Ignite Plus, which is their new initiative looking to support growth stage companies in the space as well. And Optimove, of course, is the headline sponsor of the Betting Startups podcast. So ever grateful to Optimove for their continued support, and now their support of the Starties, and everything they do for startups in the space is massive. And last but not least, we have the Sport Radar Futures Hub. Shout out to Javier and the team there, who again are doing a lot to support early stage companies in the space in a number of different ways. All 4 of these sponsored organizations have really bought into this vision. So we're super stoked. Not only is it a unique concept, but for the actual event itself, Pierre, as you're somewhat attuned to, we're trying to take a bit of a different approach here. We're not going to make this, and not to disparage other event award shows because they're great and they have their place, but it's not going to be a stuffy black tie affair. It's not going to be a 4-hour long sort of sit down at a table that you paid $5,000 for. Like, we're going to make it fun. We're trying to bring the vibes as much as we are the formalities and the hardware to recognize the startups that are doing amazing stuff across 9 different award categories. We want to make this an event to remember and celebrate the startups in a way that we think fits the founder journey. So that was a long plug. I don't know how my elevator pitch went there, Pierre, but yeah, the Starties is a real thing now. It went from an idea about 3 months ago to very quickly a reality. And the pressure that you and your team now feel, 43 days out from the New York City Summit, I now feel as well, because we've got to pull off an event at your show. So shout out to everybody that has sent in a word of support about the Starties. And, if there's any thoughts, questions, feedback people have, we are very open. We want to make this a community-driven event, and that requires buy-in from the community, but also we want to shape it to fit the needs and the wants of the community. So we're easy to reach. We want the feedback. We welcome the feedback. Bring it on. And Starty season is here, man.
I love the fact that this event is by startups for startups. And as you said, you can tell in the way it's being produced that it has a light-hearted approach to it. Rather than fancy dinner, there will be a pizza buffet. That's very kind of intuitive to the startup journey. We're going to pull down the temperature in the room, so it's almost freezing point to even further. No, I'm joking. It's going to be normal room temperature there. That's what you get, at least, even though you're a startup and you have a difficult journey. But the point is that it really is a by startup for startup event. You've done it so well, and it's so different from what you will see usually, that it really showcases the passion that is in this event. I think what you're alluding to, and I'll say it more directly, is that many of other award shows are just a money grab, and they just try to get people in the room and sell as many tickets as possible. The kind of like the standard trick in this business is nominate as many finalists as possible so that there are as many people as possible to sell tickets and tables to. It's a sales trick when you do award shows. This is not how the Starties is organized. It is a genuine passion project by yourself and Travis. You can see it in every single word that is written about it, in how it's being produced. I just love that so much, because we come from a place of passion also. We love to do great things for the industry. It makes me really proud, and it makes me really happy to partner with projects like that share the same values as we have.
Well, you did say it more directly than I did, but yeah, between the lines there, that is part of our ethos is, it's not an award that can be bought and paid for. You can't even give us money to get a table if you wanted to. So we're trying to really mix things up and take a fresh approach to this. And, we're going to take it as seriously as we need to, but we're going to have a bit of fun with it as well. It's going to be a bit of light satire. It's going to be a bit irreverent, and it's going to be a ton of fun. And I did miss in my list of shout outs there, I did miss a shout out to Travis, whose name you mentioned, Travis Geiger from WagerWire, who is my collaborator in this project, and our respective teams who have done a lot of heavy lifting over the last few weeks to get to yesterday's launch announcement. And, we're going to have to rally the troops here in the coming weeks to execute the event. But as I said, we're up for it, and we're really excited to see hopefully a full room of people there in 43 short days. So Starties.com for anybody that wants to learn more. I will stop my sales pitch on the Starties now. Looking ahead to the rest of 2025 for Next.io, what are some of the things you and the team are working on for this year that maybe we can expect to see come out, or maybe something that hasn't quite hit the radar yet that you're already working on that maybe people aren't aware of? Can you quickly sort of share what the major milestones are, I guess, for the year ahead for Next.io?
This is definitely a year for us to break our glass ceiling as an organization. We've grown very, very quickly over the last 5 years, where we kind of grow revenues by 50 to 70% each year. And that put a lot of stress on our organization. We have 50 people now, and we reached a certain point where we need to take a step back and reorganize and restructure ourselves a little bit in order to support further growth into the future. So I think this is kind of shaping and forming and kind of manifesting Next 2.0 this year, and how kind of we move away from just being seen as a conference and media organizer into something much bigger. Our big vision is to become the most influential brand in the iGaming industry, and we mean it, right? I think we have an incredible opportunity with the reach, the network, the database, the brand that we have to really spur on that reach, So now is the time to kind of rework our business model a little bit, come up with some really big ideas. Okay, let's just take a step back and ask ourselves, what's the biggest ideas we can think about, bigger than the scope that we have today? What are the really big ideas that will accelerate us into a much bigger company? And those are the type of questions that we are thinking about right now. Because I think it's easy to kind of get stuck in the day-to-day and to focus on the daily targets, the weekly targets, the monthly targets, or even the yearly targets. But it's much more difficult to stop up from time to time and really think bigger, beyond what you're comfortable with thinking. So that is generally the space we're in right now, I would say. And so there's going to be some really exciting ideas that comes from that. We're already kind of formulating and understanding who we are. And once we set that into stone, it's time to execute. But yes, it's a level up year. That's it.
Exciting, Pierre. Super pumped for you and the team that you now have this foundation that you can build upon. And certainly there's no shortage of ambition or ideas from you and the team. Every time I talk to one of you, there's ideas flying around, and you're never content just maintaining the status quo. It's always, how can we build? So no doubt whatever, we see emerge this year from Next.io is going to be, huge and eye-catching. And I'm really excited to see what the next evolution of it looks like, and Next 2.0, as you say. All right. So one thing before we let you go, Pierre, we're going to do is check in on some predictions you made last year on the podcast. And every time you come on the podcast, you make a prediction for the year ahead. And frankly, predictions is a big part of the Next events. You typically have a panel. It's a predictions panel. So I know you like to look in the crystal ball and make some guesses about what might transpire. A year ago on the podcast, just to remind you and remind the audience, you predicted that DraftKings might acquire a European-based operator, and you suggested Kindred could be an acquisition target for DraftKings. Now, in the last year, Kindred was indeed acquired by FDJ. So you got that part of the prediction correct. It wasn't DraftKings as the acquirer, though. But I guess looking back on that prediction now, does that make sense to you, that transaction? And maybe is there anything else for DraftKings for 2025 you could see them being interested in looking at?
Yeah, I did feel that Kindred is teed up to be acquired. They are, or they used to be, a traded company. They focus on regulated markets. They have an incredible team with decades of knowledge, experience in entering new markets. And to me, it made perfect sense that a local operator looking to expand into the big, big world would acquire a company like Kindred. I thought DraftKings would be a good option because sooner or later, DraftKings for sure is going to expand outside of the US. The US is big, but the world is very big. There are a lot of opportunities out there. And if you want to make a case for further growth for DraftKings, especially if there are not that many more state launches, looking outside of the US is the natural thing to do. Of course, DraftKings is already in Ontario. Whether they are going to expand into Latin America or Europe remains to be seen. But sooner or later, for sure, that is going to happen. So I would give myself at least a 7 out of 10 on that prediction. At least Kindred were acquiring. So I got that right, at least.
All right, so that tees us up perfectly for 2025. Any new predictions you want to offer up here today? And then we'll check back on that one in a year from now.
Yeah, absolutely. So my big prediction for this year is that currently, when it comes to global industry trends, everyone is looking at Brazil. My prediction is that a year from now, we are all going to talk about the UAE. That is going to be the next big gold rush for the industry. Just like Brazil came from nowhere, I think this is the year where UAE is going to come from nowhere. In 1 year's time, we're all going to be talking about UAE. That's my big prediction.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that one. I've had a few calls in the last month based around what's happening in the UAE. And I think this is an interesting prediction because, as you said, like Brazil kind of felt like it came out of nowhere. This also feels like it's coming somewhat out of nowhere, at least for those of us on the outside. So it'll be interesting to see how that market plays out in the year ahead. Last thing here, Pierre, a couple rapid fire questions. This is a bit of a new thing I'm doing at the end of every conversation. So quick answers. Let's see it. First one, it's the first app you check.
Garmin.
Really?
My Garmin app, yeah. What's my resting heart rates? Yeah.
I would have thought it'd be a layup that it would be WhatsApp and checking in on the community there. But Garmin, yeah, we'll. Next question. When you're hanging out in the karaoke lounge, what are you singing? What are you known for?
Oh my God, Jesse. I have 2 songs that I've done karaoke to perfection. If you're lucky enough, you might get to hear it at some point. The first one being Celine Dion, My Heart Will Go On. It's an absolutely incredible karaoke song. And yes, I can do it without any lyrics. Second part being Barbie Girl by Aqua. Also another very, let's say, charming and cultural piece of music. Those were really 2. You pick.
Are you putting it back to me?
What's yours? Yes.
That's a good question. I've actually, and I would never hit his vocal range, but I have gotten up on stage and hit some Guns N' Roses before. I can never quite get Axl Rose's range, but 2 songs. Sweet Child, which obviously I can't hit some of the high notes there, but power ballad November Rain, I've belted that one out a couple times as well. It's a ton of fun.
Yeah, I was thinking you were going to say the Rolling Stones will Start Me Up. It's a startup, right? That's an official startup song. Rolling Stones, Start Me Up.
Well, not to give too much away, but there's a high likelihood that you'll probably hear that song at least once at the Starties in 43 days. So we're putting the soundtrack together, and that one, pretty good chance you'll hear that one. Last one here for you. If you could swap lives with anybody for one day, who would that be and why?
Oh, wow. That is a very, very, very big question, Jesse. Yeah, who would that be? If I could swap life with one person for one day. I mean, I would say I want to be like a bird. It's not really a person. And I would just fly around and I was going to say shit on people, but no. No, but if it was one person, I'd probably be like Donald Trump. And I want to have one day in the White House to see what's actually going on behind closed doors there. That I would like to know.
I feel like I'd make it about a half a day in his being him. And I'm like, okay, it's 12 o'clock, noon. I'm out. Yeah, get me back to being Jesse.
Fair enough.
All right, my friend. Well, as always, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on and to catch up with you, and really excited to see you and the team in a few short weeks here. So for people listening that want to get their New York City Summit ticket, I would encourage them to do it ASAP because the event is limited capacity. It does always sell out, and it's the place to be for early stage companies in this space. So I implore everybody to seriously consider buying their tickets sooner than later. And for people that want to get in touch with you, Pierre, can you quickly plug the best way for them to reach you for anything they might want to contact you about?
Yeah, most social medias, you'll find me on Pierre OBV. So Pierre, obviously, it's also abbreviation. Instagram, Twitter, all of that. On LinkedIn, you can message me. I sometimes not super fast to reply, but I'll reply sooner or later. And of course, in our WhatsApp community, next.io general chat, you'll find me as well.
All right, my friend. Well, I hope the vitamin C takes hold and you're feeling better soon. Thanks for surviving the hour here with us, and we'll talk to you soon, my friend.
You're a good hype man, Jesse. Thank you so much, man.
The Betting Startups podcast is presented by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. 4 out of the top 5 US operators personalize player experiences with Optimove. Learn more about Optimove by requesting a demo at optimove.com/bettingstartups. And if you like what you see, you'll get your first month free.